Sat Sri Akaal.
My name's Manjeet Kaur.
My name's Gurnam Singh. Welcome to the One Show. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Gurnam, I'm still recovering from the last show with Harinder and Jagmeet.
Absolutely. It was
mind-blowing.
It's a phenomenal show. We got such amazing feedback. So Harinder Singh from USA and Jagmeet Singh from Canada. And I know the program has been repeated a few times, but you know, people have said that they want the YouTube. So tomorrow, kal tak kalu or jo last week or the YouTube the launge, and we'll put it on Facebook. And so if anybody missed that, then you know, definitely want to. I mean, there's one person who sent me a text saying that the word he used was "I'm mesmerized," and really, I think Manjeet, that really just help us to think that ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, if we really do a good job, if ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਦੀ ਸਹੀ ਮੈਸੇਜ ਜਾਂ communicate properly ਕਰਦੇ ਤਾਂ you know, the youngsters really want that.
Yeah.
And often we kind of get it wrong in the message as well. ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਤਾਂ ਟਾਲਿਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ expose ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਉਹ 'ਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਮਜ਼ੋਰੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ. And especially I think for like you know, young professionals, you know, to reaching out to them.
Yeah, I mean the big challenge is for us to reach out to everyone out there. And you know,
absolutely,
to all communities,
and the one show as well. Ajira apna one show. It means the one show means and it doesn't mean one for one person. It means one for humanity. And if you know, you see our kind of the word association that we have there about social justice, equality, all of these very important values in Sikhi, and so you know, this show is trying to reach out to the young professionals as well. We earlier on, what is the audience? You know, it's everybody. It's the parents, it's the children, it's the grandparents, and it's non-Sikhs as well. You know, we do increasingly have non-Sikhs watching our channel, Akaal channel, which goes out to over 100 countries in the world. So we've got a global audience, and you know, we would like to hear from our audience as well.
Yeah, definitely we do. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you, if you feel that you would like to contribute to the program, you think that or you just have a question or just a thought, then please ring in. We will.
We'd love to have your response.
Yeah, please ring in and you know, share your thoughts with us. And with a bilingual program, so you know, we're equally comfortable. Punjabi ch gal karni ja English de vich. If you want to speak in French, then we're going to struggle. Yeah, or Italian.
Unless these guys.
Yeah, well, I think maybe. So I think we should. Maybe
should we introduce?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll introduce the guests, but just to tell the viewers, our topic, our focus today is exploring Gurmat through poetry. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਫਿਲਾਸਫੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਿਧਾਂਤ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ poetry ਦੇ through ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸ਼ਾਇਰੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ poetry. But with a difference, because usually when we have programs on the Akaal channel, we have kavta, you know, poets coming in. But they read out poetry in Punjabi, which is brilliant. But we rarely do we have
in English.
In English, and we've got a poet today, Manjeet.
Yeah, we have
a poet who's written poetry about Gurbani in English.
Wow. And
also we've got a philosopher as well. So we've got the best of both worlds there.
We have
poets and philosophers. And I always say Sikhi is the dharam for poets and philosophers anyway.
Definitely.
And so I think should we introduce our guests?
Yes, why not?
Absolutely. So if we can start from my far left, you know, it gives me, I'm such a pleasure, to introduce Jasvinder Singh Johal. He's come all the way from London. Jasvinder holds a first-class honours degree in science, and he's a fellow of the Institute of Actuaries, and we're going to find out what that means later on. He works in the city where he practices in his profession. But foremost amongst his areas of personal interest are the application of scientific and rational thought, and meditation, its practice and role in spirituality. And I'm sure our other guests might want to have a bit of a conversation about the place of rationality in Sikhi, but that's something we can pick up. He's also, as I said earlier on, he's been writing poems. He's written a number of poems, tried to expound and develop concepts and ideas in Gurmat in Sikhi. You know, we will be reading some of his poems and we'll be discussing them today. So next to Jasvinder, we've got Randeep Singh, Hothi. Randeep, this is the first time, Randeep, that you're on the One Show, although I know you've been on the Think Tank. A couple of weeks ago you were. So welcome back to the Sikh channel, the Akaal channel rather. It's not the, well, it is a Sikh channel, but it's the Akaal Sikh channel, yeah. Randeep is currently doing a PhD at the University in USA, although he's a Californian, yeah? You're a kind of surfer. And Randeep completed his undergraduate studies at University of California, Berkeley, 2009. Berkeley's got a very, very long reputation of being a radical institution, and I'm just wondering, you know, there's the kind of the JNU, Johal University at the moment, where we've got similar kind of events that happened in Berkeley many years ago, and that might be something that in future programs we will explore, the kind of student radicalness. But Randeep is doing his field work at the moment in the UK, and you know, he's planning to go to Punjab as well, and his doctoral studies focusing, they keep changing, don't they, but they are focusing on diasporic Sikhs in the diaspora, and how they respond to the world around. That's a very kind of broad, but I'm sure that there will be aspects of that, and that his undergraduate thesis, he focused on this Sikh scientist and mystic, Professor Puran Singh, and he's promised me that we're going to do a special show on Professor Puran Singh as well. So Randeep, welcome to the One Show. Jasvinder, welcome, and let's do a fateh and we'll get on, yeah? Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
So Jasvinder, you're an actuary, so I can't even pronounce it. Have I pronounced it wrong?
It's fine.
Yeah?
No, it's an actuary. Yeah,
So what is an actuary?
That's a good question. It's probably one of the harder questions you're going to ask me today. It's anywhere where there's money and risk involved, an actuary. So we're actually mathematical statisticians. So that's pretty much what we apply as a trade. So we work in the insurance, life insurance and pensions industry. So yeah.
Is it a good time to buy a house or not?
It's always a good time to buy a house. It's not part of my profession, but I know that from...
What about the risk?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah.
So tell us about your interest then.
Well, I've been introduced as a poet, so I guess that's the interest I should sort of expound upon a little. I think it's pretty much as you've said, Gurnam. I think I personally came across you know, many Gurmat and Punjabi poetry, pieces of poetry around Sikhi spirituality, but I felt there was a bit of a gap in terms of sort of the English translations, and English is my first language after all. So.
I mean, just on that, there's I mean, and you know, Randeep, you can come in here as well, because I know that you're also working in kind of looking at maybe scripture. Can you really translate without losing meaning? And that's one of the kind of questions.
No, you can't translate without losing meaning. I think that is obviously one of the big issues. And given the choice, I think anyone who has the ability or capability should go straight to the Gurmat, because of the nuances that can be found in that are going to inevitably be lost in English.
Yeah.
However, you know, we are a culture of now Sikhi spreading to many different cultures, and we're trying to communicate and learn for ourselves in different languages. So a second best, I think, is to look at creative ways of expressing Gurmat in English, and poetry is one of those mechanisms.
Have you got a view about that, Randeep, the kind of the whole notion of exegesis and translation? Do you think that meaning can be conveyed across language?
Well, I think that's very complicated. I think when we think about translation, we primarily think of translation as the transference of meaning from one language to another. But you know, it's worth thinking about how even the Sikh person has been translated over time. So it's not only texts that are translated, it's not only words that are translated, but the actual bodies. And what I mean to say is that time is inherently a process of translation, where things change when they encounter other things.
But do those things change completely? Is there an essence that remains the same, and it's the kind of the other aspects that change, or does the essence itself change? That's a kind of...
that's a question that...
or is there an essence?
That may be an irresolvable question.
Yeah.
What I mean to say is that, you know, how should we put this? when we want to translate for meaning, that itself requires delimiting, and it requires pushing away other things we might be translating for.
So you
for
have
instance,
to negate in order to move forward to some extent.
well, let me give you an example. So when one goes to a website to look at translations of Gurbani, one often gets a line in Gurmukhi, and then the next line will be in English. Now let me ask you a question. How do you translate a rag? For someone who is fluent in the language of music or in the language of a rag, and who can tell the difference between one rag and another one quite easily, how does someone who's not familiar at all with rags, for Sikhs nowadays who primarily grew up listening to kirtan that's done by harmonium, how do we translate that rag into our own sensibilities?
I think that's a really good point, because certainly, like I was saying, Manjit, that sometimes at home, because we're now very westernized, so but sometimes when we get a bit emotional or we want to express ourselves, we go into Punjabi, don't we?
Yeah.
You
can express yourself very clearly. Well, you use your body language a lot. I mean, use it in English as well. But it's more easy to express yourself in Punjabi.
Yeah. So there's something about emotion, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Expressing emotion.
I think one of the interesting points, though, is translation, although inherently difficult. And I think, is the common answer you would get is effectively you can't wholly translate. So you're not going to get that 100% once you go to translation. I think that's kind of common knowledge. But what you can do is effectively experience and subjectivity, and especially spiritual experience, has no language. So from first principles, you can actually select a language and build back up to translate that, to convey rather that experience. And I think rather than trying to go about translating Gurbani or translating some of those concepts, although I've done that on a few occasions where I think it's had particular value, what I've really tried to do is come at it from afresh and say, well, these spiritual experiences are available to people. How can we communicate them in ways which people maybe of a Western culture are now more comfortable in, and even Sikhs who have first or second generation in the Western culture would be able to understand firsthand.
So it's a kind of way in, really, isn't it, to deeper understanding, which then can only be really realised through us. Because what you were saying is if we relate, because Gurbani itself is in poetic form, but it's not just in poetic form. It's actually also in musical form as well. You were mentioning the rags. And some people would share that we, as he shabad de pajariyan, and the shabad is a sound. It's a thun, it's an avaz. And in that sense, you can't really translate a sound. A sound is a sound is a sound.
But a sound is an experience.
Yeah, it's an experience.
A sound is an experience, and experiences can be interpreted and will likely be interpreted in very different ways depending on the experiencer. But for me, that's why actually, rather than normal declarative, objective language, poetry, metaphor, song, and music are actually such expressive ways to do that.
Absolutely.
Because
And the gurus,
they
of
lend
course,
themselves to experience.
in Gurbani, the gurus use those abundantly, nature, personification.
I think that's why. I think because they are speaking to an emotional first-person experience, which poetry and song and this kind of melodic conveyance works so well for. I
mean, Randeep, is Gurbani appealing to emotions, or is it appealing to rationality, or is it something? What is it? What is it speaking to? Or is it both? I mean, poetry is both subjective and objective, isn't it? It's telling a narrative, but it's also expressing feelings. Yeah.
Well, I think I'd like to draw on what you just mentioned right now, which was that, when one has an experience, it's a first-person experience that's often emotional. But for instance, if you're sad, one often doesn't ask the person, one's friend, hey, are you exactly feeling the type of sadness that I'm feeling right now? Are we sure that this translation is happening? Quite the contrary. I think perhaps we're being misled by the very concept of translation, and we should instead think about encounter. When you encounter another person, no matter what their sort of emotional state, one is subtly or not subtly transformed by just meeting that other person. And so maybe we can think about our interaction with Gurbani or the tradition not as one of translation, as one of transferring meaning from one side to the other side.
Of connecting, maybe.
Of conveying.
Of
Yeah,
connecting and
absolutely,
conveying,
yes.
yeah. That's amazing. Just ask about Randeep's background.
Yeah, Randeep, you came over to UK to do a research. What was it on?
Well, I've actually tried to study how really Sikh thought and Sikh philosophy is being explored and transmitted in the diaspora. And so I've decided to do my research in England, primarily because it seems to be a particularly vibrant site for Sikh political and social organization.
I mean, there's very rare Sikhs are interested in doing research, studies on Sikh studies, and I mean, they're more interested in their profession and making money. I mean, tell us about yourself. I mean, your path into philosophy. How did you?
Yeah. Rarely do we have kind of
people interested
Western,
in the West.
Yeah.
Sure.
Philosophers don't get rich, do they?
Philosophers don't get, yeah. Oh. You know, I think that for me, I don't think of myself as studying Sikhs or as studying Sikhism per se. I think that there are sort of universal existential questions that you know, people face, and I think of the Sikh tradition, and I think of philosophy, and I think of art, and I think of a variety of different other ways that humans have explored their lives as a way to you know, address these existential questions.
I mean, we were discussing earlier on that you know, where we situate Gurbani in this question, and you know, I was suggesting that that's precisely what Gurbani is addressing, is those existential questions. And so Gurbani there is not only just an experience, but it's a methodology as well. It's a means by which we can approach those bigger questions about, you know, what's the meaning of life, existence, life and death, and the kind of themes that you explore in your poems. Would you say that's one way of thinking about the relationship between those big questions and Gurbani?
Sure. I mean, I think that you know, there's just so much to research about really what does it mean to think in a way that's conducive to exploring Gurmat. And so I think there's just a tremendous need to reread and re-understand the textual tradition that Sikhs have, but also the history of praxis, the history of politics, the history of social organizations, the history of pedagogy, of teaching, of education. There's just so much to do.
And I mean, I think that, I mean, you would agree that we do need to do that. In a sense, we need to excavate. You know, we need to. And Gurbani tells us that there are multiple meanings in Gurbani, and we can excavate. We haven't got the end. Gurbani, it's a bottomless ocean of wisdom and knowledge. So certainly we should excavate. But some people say that when we do that, that we end up kind of challenging maybe tradition or challenging readings, and that seems threatening to some people. So how do we kind of keep the balance between exploring but not, as it were, maybe rejecting?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, one thing I've always sort of held as a value or taken from Sikhi is our one true tradition is to challenge tradition. That's the only one we should hold dear, because that's the one that's been demonstrated to us time and time again. So we shouldn't be afraid or scared of looking back at Gurbani and drawing new meaning or new experiences from it. I think that was the intention with Gurbani. It's intentionally written in a poetic fashion, with metaphor on top of metaphor and different levels, and it works on so many different levels to communicate to such a wide range of people with different levels of spiritual maturity. So you can go back and look at it time and time again and draw different meanings. We come unstuck when we try to superimpose a kind of Western template on our Gurbani and say, well, this is not a discussion or a dialogue, but this is actually a doctrine. And as soon as we take a doctrinal view of Gurbani, we suddenly look for fixed meanings and immovable facts. And I just don't think that's what Gurbani...
I think that's a really interesting point, Majid, because I think, you know, this is part of a wider debate, certainly within the debate around the Singh Sabha movement. Some people have said that that's precisely the mistake that the Singh Sabha did, was that it tried to take a Western European Enlightenment rationality and use that to reinterpret Gurbani. And when we were interviewing Harinder last time, Harinder Singh from I posed that question to him, what's the place of rationality in European enlightenment? He said, look, we have our own rationality. We have our own logic, and we have our, we do not need to. And he made a really wonderful, he said, look, discovery can happen in more than one place. It doesn't mean that there's a kind of a linear, the fact that maybe the Europeans have published ideas and science doesn't mean that other traditions haven't produced their own kind of. So I think that's another way to, and the kind of sense that there's a sense of inferiority complex, isn't there, as well, when we try to impose Western constructs on our traditions.
I think it may actually even be more than just a cultural thing. I think it may actually just be a human thing, in terms of we look to. It draws back to, or harks back to the reason why actually people get into religion, and whether they are looking for a sense of identity, a sense of belonging, and just a sense of what do I need to do in life. Just tell me the rights and wrongs. Don't tell me why. Just tell me the rights and wrongs. And if you're looking for that, then perhaps a tradition like ours, which is very introspective, is, Vichar is central to what we do in terms of constant investigation, reinvestigating ourselves, but also reinvestigating the philosophies given to us. I think that spirit is key to what we do.
I mean, just the 2 points that you made, I mean, the first one when you talked about traditions, it reminds me of Gurbani, but again, Jalo aisi reet. So the gurus themselves invoke us to burn those things that get in the way of Jitme Pyara Visre, where the Pyara, the kind of our attachment to our beloved, evaporates, kind of it becomes. And the second point that you made, I think, Vidya Vichari, Taparupakari. It says that you can only do good deeds if you are into Vidya and Vichari as well. So, in that sense, we are the dharam, if you want, the way of life of reflection, of engagement, of all of those things, yeah? But not in a kind of, I mean, we might want to come back, because the Gurus also condemned the kind of, the philosophers that, in a sense, were just simply philosophizing for the sake of philosophy. I mean, the Brahmins, the Pandits. So it's not just for the sake of philosophy, is it? That there has to be some kind of something else there. I don't know if we've just got about 30 seconds. I don't know if you want to mention briefly.
I think that there's a need to think about what the role of thinking is for the tradition. I mean, the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, whether it's by Veer Singh or Puran Singh, these are figures who are writing philosophically, writing theoretically, writing in a way that serves others, that helps others better understand the world that they live in, but also helps them address the challenges that they face.
Okay, so that's great. We're going to go for a break now, and then after break we will start to go through some of the poems. So short break and we'll be straight back. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa. Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome back to the One Show. Today, Manjit, One Show, very special One Show where we're trying to explore Gurmat through poetry, and we've got two great guests. We've got Jasvinder Singh and Randeep, all the way from USA as well. Just before the break, we were kind of really exploring these ideas around language, translation, and in a sense, what is the place of Gurbani? How do we approach Gurbani from Western rationalism or from Gurbani's own logic, or the Gurus, and we talked about Sikhya Gur Vicharan. And now we're going to go to the poems, yeah? So, I mean, Jasvinder, in his kind of, I would say, humility, he said that he'd rather I read the poems out. So
I just really like your voice, that's the thing.
It's my Yorkshire accent,
it's a beautiful voice.
It's a Yorkshire accent. But so, maybe I'm going to apologise, because if you feel like I'm, your intellectual property, I'm kind of putting my fingerprints on it. But let's have a look here. So, the first point is there is one on Mul Mantar, yeah, which. I mean, was that one of the first ones that you actually wrote?
No, it wasn't actually. It was probably one of the latter ones, because it's something that I've always wanted to do, is to take the translation of the Mul Mantar and almost make it just a bit more aesthetically pleasing, because it's so beautiful in Gurumukhi, and I wanted to at least maintain some of that in the English translation.
So I mean, I also think we need to say that these poems, in a sense, are not in any ways claiming that they represent a true reflection of Gurbani. So
That's very clear.
nobody should
Yeah.
think that somehow that they're not even translations, are they? They are poems.
This is actually the only attempt at a translation.
Yeah, this is the only attempt, but the other poems that we're going to go are just your creative kind
Absolutely.
of, creative. So let's look at this. So Mul Mantra, the prime. Mul itself is an interesting word. I mean, prime. That's one. I mean, I don't know really whether you've got in this instance when we talk about mul, because that can be like origin as well, can't it? It can be the root. We talk about mul as the root or the prime. Any thoughts about this notion of mul?
Yeah, it seems to indicate something like the sort of primalness of something. It's a root. It's sort of it's kind of essence, I guess you could say.
And I know that I've obviously explored Mul Mantra myself in the past, and one of the ways in which certainly when I've read some scholarship is that the question is, why there must be some significance why the Mul Mantra is at the beginning of the Guru Granth Sahib. It is the first utterance of Guru Nanak's commentary, if you like, on existence, on cosmology. And the fact that it starts with the number one, which is in itself, I think, quite interesting, is not the word one, but the number one. I don't know if you've ever reflected on that.
Absolutely. And actually, if there was one amendment I would make to my translation, it would be to replace the word one with the number one.
So what is the significance of the numeral? You're a mathematician, scientist.
Yeah, absolutely. So cross fields here, but I think it's massively significant. I think what Guru Nanak Dev Ji is trying to get across, in again my personal opinion, is the profundity of the awakening experience to all things being an expression of the one. So there is a real sense that sages across the time, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, sages after and before, have expressed in terms of, whereas we live in a state of distinction and duality, this experience, or this awakening experience, brings about just a unity of all things.
Well, I know recently we've just discovered the gravity waves. Not discovered them; they've been proven. Yeah. And that wave has been created out of the collision between two black holes. And one of the things that they say at the centre of a black hole or at the beginning of time was what they call the singularity. Yeah, you must have the cosmological singularity.
Yeah.
Where in a sense time and space are at one. Yeah. And sometimes I think maybe that's also another way of thinking about the Mul Mantra, is this notion of the singularity, where beyond time and space, where there is oneness, there's a stillness as well. And again, this is just speculation, and I'm not claiming that this is the actual meaning. Is there any value in this kind of a way of looking at these ideas, or do you think it's just, what do you think as a philosopher?
I don't know.
Is there any value, or are we just kind of playing games?
What's your opinion?
I'd like you to tell me more.
I think
maybe we can get into quantum mechanics.
This is a politician's answer. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, let's actually read it. So one is the creator and the created, the truth, the root identity, complete and undifferentiated, sentinel and of all causes, the cause primal, devoid of fear, devoid of hatred. All is but the one, unthreatened and without rival. Eternity manifested beyond time and its passing. Beyond concepts of life and death, the one exists constant and everlasting. Self-illuminated, the illumination both of the knowing and the known, realized by mortals not through the illusory will of ego, but by divine grace alone. So just tell me a bit about what's going on in your mind when you're coming up with these kind of
I think it draws back to poetry. For me it's a personal tool to sort of reflect on my thoughts, experiences and emotions about spirituality. And the Mul Mantra is so rich in material for that kind of reflection. For me, I find it quite useful to write these things down and put them down in a creative way, effectively. And again, I think it tied into my motive of trying to come up with a translation, alternative translation to what we have already. That's slightly more aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah. One of the things, I mean, I know you've got something that you want to...
No,
yeah.
fine.
I mean, one of the things that really hits me about this, I like that this, it's sentinel, you know, that that it's almost like you can...
Sentient.
Yeah? The sentient, that
Yeah.
you can touch it, you can experience it, but it's also the cause primal as well, so it's kind of like...
So I think so sentient, so the word I'm using there is sentient, and effectively, I think one of the key things, I mean, you were talking about why this is at the beginning of Gurbani. I think the reason, or perhaps one of the reasons why this is at the beginning of Gurbani is Guru Nanak Dev Ji is giving us the ultimate goal. He is describing for us what, you know, many terms have been used before, God, Paramatma, and so many more, but he is actually writing it down in a description saying, well, actually, all of these words by themselves don't really encompass what this experience is. So here are some primal facts about this experience. And I think one of those key ones is sentient, because you can have interpretations of the universe which satisfy all of the conditions or facts put down in the Mool Mantan, but we wouldn't really accept them as our principle of the divine unless they were actually sentient, unless there was some conscious force behind them.
There's some
if
emotions,
it was devoid, if it was inanimate in that respect, but satisfied, and it could satisfy all the rest of the facts, I think it would lose something. And I think that's why Guru Nanak Dev Ji includes the description, in a sense, of this is a doership, this is a causer of things, this is a sentient being behind this. But you know, beyond that, what you can say about that being is very difficult. But it's an important fact, I think.
And some of these things, it's a bit difficult to get your head around, but I was thinking, you know, one is the creator and the created. I mean, I don't know if you can help us, because often there's the third, not only the creator, they talk about the sustainer and the creation, so that's often the other way, that there's the three components, but you've talked about the two components there, yeah?
I mean, if I just go into that in a bit of detail, because I think one of the issues I've always had with the common translations of Ik Onkar is I think we've actually oversimplified it, and we've lost something in that oversimplification. And I think there's particular reasons why we've oversimplified it as well. But it's commonly translated as one God. And I think we just lose so much in that, it's unbelievable. So in terms of the breakdown of the word, Om, I'm sure everyone is familiar with as a symbol, and that encompasses the sort of trinity of the creator, sustainer, and destroyer. But
Vishnu, Brahma.
Absolutely. Yeah. But when you look at the Sanskrit, the meaning of Om, or the context which has been used in historically, it does refer to effectively the creation. It does refer to the material world that we inhabit. So it's been used as a symbol to describe reality effectively. I think what Guru Nanak Dev Ji does is he takes the kar, which is also a Sanskrit suffix, which there are variations on this. I should caveat, because I have heard other variations and translations, but my personal view is that the kar implies doership again, and it implies a causer, and it's related, sort of etymologically, it's related to the word karna or karnvala, or something that is responsible for. So again, this comes back to Guru Nanak Dev Ji's profound realization that the creation, everything that we see, and the divine are actually one and the same. Creator and created are one. That's the revelation. Today we almost use it as a symbol of, oh look, we're monotheists, and we're monotheists because the Hindus are polytheists, and we want to separate ourselves and distinguish ourselves, and it's become this symbol of distinction. In fact, for me, it's a symbol of no distinction. It's a symbol of unity. It's a symbol of God is actually infused throughout creation, and it's one thing. So that's what I wanted to try to get.
That's really interesting. Randeep, do you want to comment on any of that?
No.
He's just busy listening, absorbing, So, I mean, I don't think there's anything else on this one that you wanted to explore particularly. I mean, the last line really, I think, was very interesting. Realized by mortals not through the illusory will of ego, but by divine grace alone. So what is this notion of divine grace that we talk about? How would can we empirically observe that? Can we record that? Is it very subjective? And how do we know, how do we recognize divine grace?
I think you could look at it in a number of different ways. It's interesting you use the word sort of empiricism there, because actually, empirically, we can observe at least that the ego is illusory. That's actually, modern science, we're talking about Western science. Modern science is actually also from completely independent direction are actually coming to that conclusion. Because if you insist on a materialistic world where atoms hit other atoms and there's a cause and effect relationship, Western science has come to the conclusion there really is nothing left for a transcendent force to be sitting in each of us and sort of pulling handles which are beyond the laws of physics. So actually you can come at it from that perspective and say, well, actually you can see in an empirical point of view that the free will is illusory. Now Christians and the Abrahamic traditions have a real problem with that because free will is central to their beliefs. Conveniently for us, it actually plays right into something that's been said in Eastern traditions for thousands of years. But I think it can be observed empirically from a first-person perspective. I think one of the roles of meditation, or one of the insights that meditation gives, is it allows you to observe the things which you conventionally take responsibility for, so your everyday actions, and shows you that actually you're as much an observer of these things as everyone else. Like, for example, I'm not pre-thinking the words that are coming out of my mouth.
Just
I'm hearing them as you're hearing them, and yet you will confer.
Well, that's interesting you
responsibility
say
to me,
that,
and so will I.
because there's been some interesting research in neuroscience.
Absolutely,
where they've actually been observing the behavior of the brain, and they've actually detected, you said that you don't pre-think them, they've actually detected some kind of correlation between some processes, before the utterance.
Yes, absolutely. But
before the action.
I think the key thing is they've discovered that they're not conscious pre-thought. So you're not conscious of those. So the question then becomes is how much can you take credit or responsibility for things that you're not conscious of? So that's been the revelation that neuroscience has brought to the table and said, well, people are claiming to make a decision between right or left, but actually I could have told you 500 milliseconds before by looking at an MRI what you were going to decide. So that really shakes the concept of free will as we currently understand it.
But it also, I think, leaves another question, which is what precedes that, if anything at all? And if not, then what is the basis upon which that thought itself would emerge? Is it simply just some kind of chemical reaction, or is there some divine kind of connection there? Now, it's a tantalizing kind of a
Well, I think it doesn't need to be a dichotomy. You don't need to set it up as, is it physics or is it divine? I think, again, Guru Nanak Dev Ji reminds us, and we're falling into the same trap. He's, Ek Onkar, his first declaration is, don't be fooled into thinking that the world you live in is in any way separate from the divine that you seek. So as soon as we start setting up, well, we understand the world in physics now, so where's the divine? We're falling into that same dichotomy again. So we need to bring it back together. It's only language that separates it.
But then we get into the kind of discussions about the body and the soul, if you like, Atma. And so if we use this kind of formulation, then actually the Atma, the physical and the divine is not separate, then the body and the soul are really part of the same thing. Can they be separate? Because we talk about them separating out at death.
I don't.
So are these ways of thinking about existence, or are these empirical entities? Somebody said to me, that if when at the point at which you die, does your body get lighter, in the sense that does the kind of soul leave it, and it's absurd to think that it gets lighter. But then we also talk about the soul as residing in the kind of chemical structure of the body. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know if there's any way out of this.
You want to come at this from your philosophical perspective?
No, please. I prefer the poet's perspective.
I think I'm branching out of my poetry realm at the moment. So I personally feel that
people talk about it floating away from your body, but I would say, where does it float to?
Well, those questions are only relevant if you accept the validity of the soul as an empirical artifact. And to be honest with you, I think there are a lot of useful metaphors, and this is why I sort of talked about metaphor upon metaphor that are used in Gurbani, and perhaps I would suggest that the soul is one of those metaphors. That's not to belittle the experience of having a soul, or a spirit, or whatever you want to call it, but the interesting thing is science has pushed us, and rationality and sort of the application of logic has pushed us so much in the direction of being able to tell us what we're made up of, that it's actually left no room for the soul. So then it leads to those kind of contradictions.
Well, the other thing is, for me, is that if the Atma is actually part of the Paramatma, that it is part of the Paramatma, that the soul, the divine, within you, then that already exists in every place,
Absolutely.
doesn't it? So this idea that someone might jump to that place
Absolutely.
is absurd because it's already there.
Yeah. And also the issue is with the soul, you hark back to this sense of belonging, that there is something that is mine, which is inherently mine. It's my soul residing in my body that will one day leave my body and perhaps enter another body. But then you look at the Gurbani and it tells you a whole lot about ego and the illusory nature of ego. So if you're going to cling to that metaphor, you have to reconcile for yourself, or how do you then explain the egolessness nature of existence? And for me, the soul loses out. It's one and all. It's ikonkar. There is nothing that belongs to me independently. There is nothing that I need to explain in terms of what leaves my body. It's all out here now.
That's great. Should we move on to the next point? Did you want to on that one? Yeah. Okay. I mean, this next one I think is you've called it God-given gift. Yeah. And the first line it reminds me of Jot
It's not an autobiography, by the way. That one. It's not.
But I'm linking it with Jot Prem
Sure,
Khelan Ka Chao. Yeah. Through an act of love has God bestowed the gift, a droplet for each from the ocean of consciousness, the infinite ocean that He is, and it is His. Through this single drop we are able to experience the entire creation, wonders, pleasures, pains, sorrows, and all manner of manifestation. Mesmerizing objects which captivate are allowed to be experienced. Through this single consciousness, existence itself is lived. And yet, as powerful and intense each and every possible experience, the irony of life is simply this. The most precious experience to be had is itself that mechanism through which we experience that primal God-given gift. To turn away from the objective experience, that the consciousness itself is a door to everlasting bliss. For to cherish and hold that droplet of Him is to recognize His presence in all that is. Turning away from the transient and objective is to realize His presence in one's midst. To withdraw our attention from the phenomenal in favor of the subjective is to begin to solve the riddle that this life actually is. To cling to this drop of consciousness is to request passage home to none other than Him. Our return to the ocean of pure consciousness, the source of eternal heavenly bliss. Know that you are the knowing, not the know or the knower. All that is required is simply this: hold steadfast in this realization, and the truth of existence and the nature of the One certainly shall not be missed. So what's the kind of message, what's the kind of argument that you're trying to offer here, insight?
Well, I think what I'm doing there is I've tried to explore a particular metaphor. So it's one that we've used, I think, especially in modern Sikhi quite a lot in terms of how we relate to God in terms of the ocean that is God, and we are droplets of that. And that's always, I think, is quite.
Paramatma, this concept of the samundar here.
And I think it comes back to your point of, you're talking about soul there, but for me, really, if there is such a thing as a soul, or if there is such a thing as a spirit, then it is our experience of consciousness. And if God is anything, or if God, the primal characteristic that we would want the divine to have is consciousness, I think we would be uncomfortable with an unconscious Lord of the universe, because that would effectively just be a mechanistic.
So is consciousness the act of love that God has bestowed upon us? Is that the gift of consciousness, of beingness?
I think beingness is spot on, is exactly that. It's the most valuable thing that we have. If you spend any time thinking about it, it's the most phenomenal thing that's happened in the 13.7 billion years of universal evolution, that material matter should come together and suddenly know its own existence and suddenly be able to recognize that it exists.
One of the things there is this notion of gift, is that, Gurbani also talks about Manukhi Janam, the gift of Manukhi Janam, implying that it's in Manukhi Janam that we have the consciousness or the capacity, to feel, to love maybe, to become one with the Creator. Yet, on the other hand, Gurbani also talks about the existence of this divineness in all all beings, all living beings, non-animate beings as well. Sabbe kat Ram bole, Rama bole, Ram jana ko bole re. Astavar jangam, Kita patangam, from the elephants to the kira to the birds, all these kata kata Rams manara. In every heart, Ram is Samaya is there. So we have this interesting kind of dichotomy between, on the one hand, the gift of Manukhi Janam, but also the fact that God is pervading everywhere anyway. So how is there something this notion of beingness, of consciousness? Is it a unique consciousness that we human beings have, or is it more privileged consciousness? I don't know.
Maybe Randeep wants to come in a little as well.
Yeah,
well then.
Manukhi.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
so that's a good philosopher's answer, actually. That's.
I mean, if I can just respond.
Plato, Aristotle talks about that. I mean, the whole of Aristotle's work is about the human beings and the form.
Well, let me just respond this way. We've talked previously about how Gurbani has, in a way, challenged philosophers to stop philosophizing too much and to quit theorizing.
I'm going to have to stop the philosopher because we've got 10 seconds. Okay.
So I mean, so let me just say, what are we doing right now?
Okay. Yeah. So we're gonna. What are we doing? What are you doing right now at home?
Yeah.
Are you making the coffee? Are you thinking, what are these crazy people doing in the studio? We'll come back after the break. Welcome back to the final part of our one show, where we're into pretty deep philosophical thought today, and it's mind-blowing, mesmerizing, and we also, if you would like to call in, did you see Sadi Vachar Sonake, you've been provoked, you've been troubled, or you've been, you just like to add to the conversation, then feel free to ring in, and it doesn't matter, even if it's just a question that you want to ask.
Yeah, we love to hear your views. We've got the experts here.
Yeah, we don't expect you to give a complex refutation of the arguments, just sharing. So the numbers on the scroll, so feel free to ring in. But just guys, before the break, I kind of posed the question that this idea about Manukhi Janam, to be human. And, to some extent, much of philosophy, in fact, the whole, even Gurbani, although we can't talk about Gurbani just as philosophy, ask the question, what is to be a human? I mean, in Gurbani says, Prani tu aaya laha len, laga ke takha pakade, sab mukti chale rahe. It says, Prani, what have you come here for? So what is it to be human? I mean, where do we going to begin with this question? What is it to be human?
Well, yeah, I get these hard questions. Well, I just think that from my humble reading of Gurbani, I think it's seen as, or one way to understand it is as a valuable opportunity to meet one's beloved. And throughout Gurbani, we hear that even the devte, the various deities and gods, yearn to be human.
Yeah.
And so, I think that one way to think about Gurmat is a way for humans who are caught in home to find a way to encounter their beloved and to disintegrate the boundaries between their home and their other and the beloved. And so I think human life can be seen as a rare, as a profoundly rare opportunity to have this profound experience of union.
Yeah.
And is that because humans have higher intellectual capabilities, that is it because we have certain capacities? You talked about sentinel earlier on, yeah?
Sentient, yeah.
Sentient.
Yeah.
The capacity to have emotions, to have empathy. Because just recently there was something in the news about that horses could recognize emotions, and that there's some scientific discovery that actually this notion of empathy is much more pervasive than we might think. So what is it that's special? Because Gurbani talks about Manukhi Janam as being a special form. What is it that's unique about Manukhi Janam? Is it that sense of subjectivity? Because I know that in your poems you're saying subjectivity is the kind of key thing.
Well, so it's always going to be a difficult question to answer because we can only ever do it from the human perspective. So to compare ourselves to the rest of the animal kingdom is always going to be a philosophical sort of
Bit
attempt
empty.
at best. But I think, for me, I mean, just looking at what we know of the evolution of man, effectively, I mean, the sort of latest or the current scientific thinking on the development of the ego is that it's something that developed in us around 70,000 years ago. And although scientists think that other animals do possess some sense of ego, it's most profound in us. And it's probably the reason why we're so successful as a species on this planet. I mean, among all the animals, we've done pretty well. And we are an animal.
We're imperialistic.
We are a super evolved ape, as some people put it. But the ego is a blessing and a curse in that it is an incredibly effective tool from an evolutionary standpoint to make us preserve ourselves and to perpetuate our genes, and therefore become this extremely successful species on the planet. But evolution doesn't promise anything about happiness. It's only safeguards your sort of next link in the chain. So what the ego has done is it's this incredibly powerful software that's running on the hardware of the brain to help preserve ourselves and perpetuate our genes, but it doesn't do happiness and bliss and peace of mind very well. So that's where Gravani has come and said, right, you now need to start dismantling this software.
Are we trying to destroy the ego? Okay, if you go to Freud talks a lot about ego as well, and he talks about the three states, doesn't he, Manjit? The id, the super id, and the ego. And for Freud, the whole point is that in a sense, our existence is predicated on the ego. That without the ego, we can't exist.
No.
It's an interesting paradox, yeah? And to some extent, you know, human is born with ego as well, so there's a similarity. But what Freud said is that the whole idea is to have that ego in a state of balance, in a fine-tuning, if you want. And if it gets, you know, if you have deflated ego, then that itself leads to loss of confidence, lack of assertiveness, and if you have an inflated ego, then you kind of become blind to other people's feelings, and you kind of greed and everything else gives birth to the Panjavakat, yeah? But if you can really harness the ego is the life force itself. And Gurbani, I mean, does Gurbani talk about destroying the ego or about harnessing the ego?
No, I don't think it does. I think it's easy to read Gurbani and start to demonize the ego, effectively. It's easy to take that interpretation because the Gurbani does talk about, obviously, you know, ego, Homme being the dog, the Bamari that's befallen us. So, but again, I think it does so in poetic terms. It does so, you know.
Should we read? I mean, you've got the poem.
Why not?
The Homme ego. Now that we've got into the conversation about the ego, should we read that? It's probably going to be the last one before we finish the show. So, I think maybe let's just focus on the ego, because that is something that even non-philosophers like me can understand. Yeah. Okay. So, this is our last desi poem. Barna, it's actually called Homme, or the ego. So, courageous are they who turn inward and inquire into the nature of their own being. They who contemplate and confront the inevitable annihilation of self. The true warrior is he who dares challenge and deconstruct his own ego. He who dares question that which is considered by most to be intimately familiar and undoubtable. He shall have to stand and face the ego beast on the battlefield of his own mind, to outwit and outflank an opponent who is perfect in its preemption of all endeavours to defeat it. He shall have to endure a storm of fears and despair as a threatened ego lashes desperately for its continued survival and dominance. But for the blessed who endure and succeed in taming the ego beast, for those whom the ego yields the ultimately fragments, they experience the calm waters after the terrible storm. In these still waters shall their true egoless reflection emerge. They experience the radiant peace of self-awareness, unobscured by the waves and ripples driven by the winds of ego. Revealed to them in this stillness is the true and divine nature of their existence, a nature common to all and all-pervading, revealed to them in eternal oneness, Ekunkar. So I kind of got this kind of violent journey here. There's a kind of, and there's very powerful kind of words and metaphors. almost battle and pain and suffering. And then the calmness. It's almost as if, talking about Michigan or whatever, you're going over Niagara Falls. And then there's this kind of stillness.
Stillness.
So this kind of, what was it? What was this? The annihilation of the self. It's almost like you're fighting yourself. What's going on here?
I think all I wanted to do with that is I wanted.
It's an enemy. It's an opponent. It's a kind of battle.
And again, I think you can look at the ego in different perspectives, and you can almost. I think there's a risk in demonizing it, and perhaps that's what I've done there. But I think what I wanted to do there is just highlight that it can be a formidable opponent. That the ego is something that we all talk about in Gurbani, and we're used to talking about in terms of this is something that we need to lose in some sense.
Well, Gurbani does talk about the Panjavacar as the kind of as the Mahabali, as the great warriors.
Yeah.
Mahabali, Sure. And the Sura is the one that the great warrior that defeats those. Talks about Chor as well. So there are all these. So yeah, you were saying that these kind of enemies that exist within you.
Yeah. So it is a metaphor to try to highlight the fact that the ego it can be a tricky opponent, effectively. And there are possibly, I'm sure everyone has different experiences, but certain people will have a calm and easy ride in sort of dismantling the ego, and it will effectively play ball. But for others where the ego has really taken hold, it may be more of a battle. And the sages have talked about various different experiences through spiritual journeys, and some of those are fears and sort of very difficult experiences that people have to go through before they actually reach those calm waters. So it's almost just a possible route. It's a possible of many different possible routes in terms of a spiritual progression. So it's just trying to give some life to the life or meaning to some people's experience of things, really.
If I may ask you a question, you had previously mentioned that it was your first poem that we read here that was translation, and the subsequent ones you don't consider translations. But nevertheless, do you think of this poetry as a kind of a vyakya, a kind of an exposition of Gurbani and Gurmat? Do you think of this as a kind of way of doing vichar?
I certainly think it's a way of doing vichar. I certainly think it's a way to open up dialogue, and that's very important for sort of the communication of ideas. But for me personally, it's not something that I'm intentionally doing with respect to Gurbani. It's not as if I'm actually going out there to find a Gurbani concept and then basically explain that. For me, really, it's part of my own journey to explore my own thoughts, ideas, and experiences. And given my cultural background, I communicate those in terms of concepts that I've been brought up with or am used to. So framing them in a Sikh perspective, but communicating them in the Western English language. So it is a bit of a mix and match, but effectively that's, I think as modern Sikhs, that's what we are. We're a bit of a mix and match. So that's my attempt at sort of exploring and reflecting on sort of personal thoughts and experiences.
Sorry, I missed out. Before the ego, the topic before, because I missed on this one actually. I was just there. Who is the baby daughter?
Gurdaya. Gurdaya is my 8-month-old baby daughter, who is the joy of my wife and my life.
Right.
And that was a poem that I had written as a kind of gift to her. And my wife had sort of commissioned me to write something.
How old is she now?
She's 8 months old.
So she's probably not watching, but is your wife watching at the moment?
I don't know, actually.
Okay.
She said.
Well, we've only got a few
She finds me
minutes.
quite dull, so I'm not sure.
We've got a few minutes, but shall we read out the Gurdaya?
I think
That would be
that was
wonderful, yeah.
that was amazing.
Okay, so we'll read out the Gurdaya and then we'll just do some conclusions. We've only got a few minutes left. So this is Gurdaya, Divine Compassion, and it's named after your daughter, yeah? Dear precious pearl of mine. So this is not metaphor, this
so
is real.
Beautifully.
Yeah. Dear precious.
Would you like me to read this one?
Yeah, you do that.
This is a personal one.
This is a personal one. You do it. Yeah, there
I'll
you
read
are.
this one to my daughter.
Yeah.
So, dear
Listen.
precious pearl of mine, what fortune upon me the universe does bestow. A divine compassion for such a treasure I have not earned, and neither does the universe me owe. In your laughter I find my joy, in your bright eyes innocence and wonder.
So beautiful.
My mind has found deep peace when in my arms you rest in sweet slumber. With your cries and tiny tears my heart does ache. On your happiness does my own now intrinsically depend. I shall do all I can, my baby daughter, to shower you with love and from sorrows defend. A joyous gift is this sentient existence. Life blossoms with possibilities abound. I shall guide and walk with you hand in hand until you are ready to stand firm upon life's unsteady ground. In you is born a unique and new perspective on this world, upon the universe new meaning and value you impart.
Beautiful.
I think there's a line underneath
You
that.
know,
Oh,
you
there
should
is.
do-
Sorry, I've missed it on your thing. And although no individual does the universe evolve, each of us is at its centre, each is at its heart.
Wow, wow.
You should really frame this. for,
Well,
Well, it was designed to be a kind of a
beautiful.
gift for when
Yeah.
she sort of understands it.
Yeah.
So anyway, guys, we've only got just over a minute left, so we're just going to come to any summing up. Any last thoughts, Randeep? Any last thoughts, just to sum up?
I think we need more poets. So that's my last thought.
I think we need more philosophers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say
Yeah.
to each other.
Jasvinder, any last thoughts from just? I mean, why aren't more Sikhs doing this kind of thing?
Well, perhaps they will now. Perhaps they just need, a bit of encouragement, and perhaps they are, and they're just not out there. I mean, I've not really.
So,
put my
also,
poetry
if
out
you're
there.
out there, come
Yeah.
and we'll bring you on. Majid, any thoughts?
So inspired by them.
Yeah.
It's just amazing what the piece of work, the poems
Yeah.
that you wrote, and it's just like I'm gobsmacked.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So,
Brilliant.
unfortunately, time flies. We've actually run out of time. We've only got a few seconds. And there are a lot more poems, and we will bring him back, and we will bring more people, interesting people like him. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. It's different. It's a
Just
bit
want
more.
to say thank you as well.
Yeah, thank you for
down.
coming down.
Thank you for having us.
And sometimes we have to work at these things.
Definitely we do.
We've become a bit lazy and just want things kind of packaged.
Bole